It starts with a room that feels safe. Soft lighting, calm voices, a box of tissues placed exactly where you can see it, and three people sitting in a triangle, pretending they all came here for the same reason. But they didn't. Because in family counseling, the truth is rarely shared. It's negotiated, and sometimes manipulated. Here's the uncomfortable part no one tells you. Most families don't walk into counseling to fix the problem. They walk in to prove who the problem is. A quiet statistic, rarely advertised. Studies in family therapy outcomes suggest that in a significant number of cases, at least one participant enters the room already convinced of the verdict. Not curious, not open, convinced. They're not looking for resolution, they're looking for validation. And that changes everything. Because the moment validation becomes the goal, therapy stops being healing and starts becoming strategy. Right now, family counseling is more popular than ever. Searches for therapy have surged globally, mental health awareness is rising, and on the surface, this looks like progress. But beneath that surface, something more complex is happening. We've taken a deeply human process, conflict, emotion, identity, and placed it inside a structured system with rules, roles, and incentives. And any system can be gamed. Let's break it down. A typical family counseling session has three key forces: the speaker, the listener, and the interpreter, the therapist. Simple, almost too simple. Because the therapist doesn't just listen, they translate. They take raw emotion and turn it into narrative. And here's where the first psychological shift happens. Whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. Imagine this. One person says, "They never listen to me." Another says, "They're always overreacting." Both statements feel true to the person saying them, but truth in counseling isn't measured by accuracy, it's measured by coherence. Who tells the cleaner story? Who appears more self-aware? Who uses the right language? Because therapy has a language, and not everyone speaks it equally. This is where dark psychology quietly enters the room. Some people, consciously or not, learn to perform emotional intelligence. They know when to pause, when to soften their tone, when to say, "I understand how that made you feel." Not because they actually do, but because it works. It signals growth. It signals maturity. And most importantly, it signals credibility. Now contrast that with someone who's genuinely hurt but can't articulate it neatly. They interrupt, they get defensive, they contradict themselves. Not because they're wrong, but because pain is messy, and messy doesn't look convincing. So slowly, almost invisibly, the room begins to tilt. Not toward truth, but toward presentation. There's an irony here. The person who needs the most help communicating is often the one least believed. And the person who has learned to communicate strategically can shape the entire perception of the family dynamic. This isn't manipulation in the obvious sense. No one is lying outright. They're just selecting which version of truth to present. And then comes the second layer: time. Most counseling sessions are limited, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. That's not enough time to unpack years of history. So what happens? Compression. Complex relationships get reduced into digestible fragments. A fight becomes a pattern becomes a label, and a label becomes identity. The responsible one, the difficult one, the avoidant one. Once those labels stick, they're hard to remove because every future session starts from that assumption. This is where the system reveals its hidden math. If one person consistently appears composed and reflective, and another appears reactive and emotional, over time, the probability of the therapist aligning with the composed individual increases. Not because the therapist is biased, but because human brains look for consistency. We trust what feels stable, even if it's incomplete. And then something subtle but powerful happens. The identified problem in the family starts to internalize that role. They begin to think, maybe it is me, even if the original issue was shared or even external. This is called role absorption, and it's one of the quietest forms of psychological influence. No one forces it, no one announces it, it just settles in. Now let's flip the perspective. Therapists are trained to remain neutral, to guide, not judge, but neutrality itself can be interpreted. If a therapist doesn't challenge one person strongly enough, the other may feel unheard. If they challenge too much, they risk breaking trust. So therapists constantly balance on a thin line, and in that balancing act, they rely on cues: tone, language, consistency. The very same cues that can be performed. Here's where the system becomes almost paradoxical. Family counseling is designed to reveal truth, but it depends heavily on perception, and perception can be influenced. Not through deception alone, but through framing. How you say something matters as much as what you say, sometimes more. And this leads to the biggest misconception, that counseling is a neutral battlefield where truth automatically wins. It's not. It's a negotiation space where emotion, memory, communication skill, and subtle strategy all interact, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes competitively. But this doesn't mean family counseling is broken. Far from it. In many cases, it works remarkably well. It creates space, it slows down conflict, it introduces language where there was only silence. But it's not immune to human behavior, and human behavior is rarely pure. Zoom out, and the implications get bigger, because what happens in that small room reflects something larger: how we assign blame, how we interpret emotion, how we decide who gets to be right. Family counseling doesn't just reveal family dynamics, it reveals how we process truth itself. So the next time you imagine that quiet room, the soft lighting, the calm voices, ask yourself this: if three people walk in with different versions of reality, and only one version leaves feeling validated, was the problem solved or just reframed? And more importantly, who decided which version of the story deserved to survive?